biggest piece of advice I can give you is this. My biggest regret in Masonry.
Okay.
I didn't do it sooner. I should have done it sooner. 100%.
Welcome to the Symbolic Lodge of Conversation, where consciousness and curiosity interweave into discussion. This is All Square Podcast. I'm your host, R.L. Franks, and today's guest has been a Mason for over 13 years. He traveled all the way from the great state of Michigan, and he is a past most illustrious Grand Master of the Royal and Select Council of Michigan. This is the story of my brother, Christopher Potts. Christopher, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for inviting us down here today. It's fantastic to be with you.
I really appreciate you being here in the Symbolic Lodge. Now, did I get that title right or not? Let's start.
Close. You were very, very close. The technical title is the past most illustrious Grand Master of the Royal and Select Masons of the state of Michigan.
There it is. And we're so honored for you to be here. You're a well-traveled Mason and also a brother who we just recently met at another gathering out in Indiana. And listen, 13 years is an incredible journey. Not only that, you also exemplified leadership for a whole state. There is not an episode we have really talked about what is this branch known as the York Rite Masonry. But before we get into that, every Mason is a man and every man has a story. So, Chris, tell us, where do you come from?
So, to kind of dial that back in of how I got into the fraternity, I have to go back quite a bit. As a little kid, I grew up in this teeny tiny little town called Hope, Michigan. It was so small, we didn't even have our own school system or anything. So I had to hop this bus over 17 miles to get to another school system called Beaverton. So that's northern lower peninsula. But then when I was 9, we moved back to the city of Midland, which is where I was born. So I did the rest of my growing up there. And then I moved to Lansing in 2002. So that being said, I've always been the very curious child. I've gotten into a lot of trouble throughout the years, just always asking why. Interesting upbringing with my family and different things there. The easiest way for me to go about saying that is, like I said, I was always curious and always pushing and wanting to know why, because like my mother's family came from Poland. So grandma and grandpa had a big, thick accent and stuff like that. And they acted very different from my dad's family, who were English, and they've been in Midland since 1890s. So, that was kind of an interesting kind of blended house in that respect. So that kind of led me down asking, why are things culturally different? Why is our history different? And that kind of followed me all the way through school. And
but where did this pursuit of more knowledge, questioning everything come from?
Just kind of a natural curiosity more than anything. But then once you started drawing conclusions and seeing the web, seeing the bigger picture, and starting to fill in everything, that's really where it got to be very interesting for me. So I was placed in like advanced classes right from the get-go when I was in Midland. So, by the time I was like in 3rd grade, I was already looking at comparative religions and stuff like that. By the time I was in 5th grade, I had already like kind of run down this rabbit hole of comparing, my household was technically Catholic. But then I'm drawing correlations between, we have this, and this as saints. But, I'm also seeing this in, Greek mythology or Egyptian mythology or Norse mythology, kind of putting all those together. So that kind of led me into my fascination with the medieval times and knights and kings and everything like that. And that's actually how I ended up in Masonry right there. So let me explain that.
Okay.
So the fascination with knights, of course, you run across the Knights Templar at that point in time. Now
Absolutely.
You can kind of see where I'm going with this. You learn about these fantastic warrior monks and what all is happening in Europe at that time. And then, of course, we fast forward, through my adult life. Now I'm married, have kids. I went back to school, and I'm sitting in the library because I'd already started my profession. At that point in time, I'm sitting in the local history department, and my boss comes over to me. My undergrad was in European history, and he knew I was fascinated by all this Knights Templar stuff. So he throws this box of a collection down on the desk and says, "You're into all this Knight Templar stuff. Go ahead and see if this is worth keeping in our local history collection or not." So I open it up, and it's all these artifacts from a past Grand Commander of the state of Michigan by the name of Seth Jones, who was also from Lansing.
Where's he? What year was this?
I want to say he was Grand Commander in like 1913, 1918. It's in the teens. I wish I would have prepared that ahead of time.
No worries. That's why we like real, raw, live here at All Square. And just so the audience knows, your profession is a librarian.
Yes.
Now, for just like the federal library, are you part of a university?
No, I'm part of a public library system.
Okay, that's right. The public library. Okay.
Yeah. So, I'm going through this box of artifacts. It's got photos of like these huge Knight Templar parades. Now, to be specific, this is the Masonic Knights Templar, obviously, not the old crusading order from 1,000 years ago. So my boss only had that cursory understanding of they both had the name Knights Templar, even though they're not necessarily the same organization.
Symbolically, they share, I would say they share a lineage.
Yeah, I would say that the official stance, well, maybe I shouldn't say official stance because I'm not speaking in any official capacity.
It's your opinion.
But my opinion is that they draw inspiration from the ancient order. They pattern themselves after the ancient order. They're trying to live up to those ideals. So anyway, I'm looking through this case. I'm fascinated by everything I'm in there. And I'm like, what is this organization? And then it kind of clicked of, how do I become one? Is this still around? So I looked it up, and sure enough, Lansing Commandery 25 still exists. Then I found out you needed to be a Mason to belong to this order. So that's what led me to start looking into Masonry.
Did you have any lineage in your family with Masonic roots into the fraternity that you could have maybe bounced off questions of how to be a part of this?
Surprisingly, no. And I'll put a big old asterisk by that, okay? Because at the time, I had no idea anyone in my family was a Mason, okay? So once I became a Mason, then that's when I started hearing tales from, cousins and grandparents of, oh, this person was a Mason, or that one's a Mason, or, you're related to this famous person and I know they were a Mason. So that kind of led me down that rabbit hole for like my genealogy studies.
Yeah.
That was just absolutely fascinating because, like, for example, my grandmother's maiden last name, my dad's mother, so paternal grandfather or paternal grandmother, her last name is Howe, Howe. And yes, that is the same family as General Howe and Admiral Howe.
Oh.
So
do you want to give a little quick explanation of who that is?
A quick explanation of who General Howe and Admiral Howe is everybody knows who George Washington is the leader of the colonial armies. General Howe and Admiral Howe were the leaders of the Crown's army at the time. So he was exactly the polar opposite of Washington. He was the one fighting the colonials on behalf of King George.
Do you have some experience with genealogy? You seem so enrooted because you were asking questions. Do you have a genealogy background that you trace that back to?
Absolutely. I got into doing family history back before I even went to university to get my degrees and that stuff. Because like I had mentioned, my family was kind of mixed, having that very strong Polish side and the very strong English side, them just having these diametrically opposed viewpoints at home. And they were a very proud family on both sides. So I needed to understand myself of how did we get here? How did we become that? So that's what led me to start asking those questions about family and then learning, like, well, this is part of this family and that's part of that, and once you stumble across to a very, I don't want to call him famous, but a significant person, let's just say it that way. So like, obviously, like I mentioned, my grandmother's last name was Howe, but once I learned, uh, her like grandfather or something was somebody of significance, they had a family crest. So I was able to plug into that. And then that shot me all the way back to like 1510 in London, because that's just all very well documented because they were a very well family, which is how I was able to find the other people in the family tree that I knew to be Masons, because both the Admiral Howe and General Howe were Masons as well.
What happened in like the post era of Howe's career after the war is over?
Ooh, don't ask me that. I don't remember.
Oh, you don't know? Fair enough. Fair enough. You can plug in at your local library to find that.
Yeah.
You were given this box by your boss.
Yep.
I don't know what to make of this. You're going to love these knights and logos and trinkets. And it leads you off on a journey to find out that Masons are just coming out of the tree of your family's tree, and finding there is that relationship there. It's a true lineage, unlike the spiritual lineage of the old Knights Templar and the Masonic Knights Templar, which is considered a military order. But how old are you at this time?
I was 32.
32, great age. I mean, in Ohio, the average age for a Mason is 67. And what's the average age in Michigan?
I couldn't tell you.
You couldn't tell. Okay.
My experience with like my lodge specifically, because we've done just yeoman's work turning it around, I would say the average age of my lodge has dipped from the 80s down to about 55. Like when you go into Lansing Lodge 33 now, I would say the old guy that's in the room is like 60.
Okay. How did you knock on the door to really kick you off into this journey?
So that was just a quick little, like, I did the Google search that ended me up at the Grand Lodge's website. I filled out the contact form. Grand Lodge got in contact with me. I filled out the questionnaire. Then they sent on that questionnaire to the local lodge. The local lodge got a hold of me, and then I just kind of went and interviewed with them.
Wow. What was that experience like?
A little awkward, just because, you're going in to meet these people you have no connection with. No frame of reference. Of course, they want to know, are there any other Masons in your family? And at the time I had to answer no, because I didn't know of any. And even then, I know from my specific family, it's just generationally that I've got some back in the family tree. But my dad wasn't a Mason. My grandfather wasn't a Mason, stuff like that. So that was kind of a little bit weird. But I mean, they were welcoming. They were friendly. They wanted to get to know me as a person. And that's what eventually led me to petition.
Now, when you petition this lodge, before that, you met with them, correct?
Yes.
I want to make sure I understand the story. You petition a lodge. The next steps in Ohio, and I know states have different procedures of investigation. Did you have an investigative committee come to your house and want to meet you? Were you married at the time?
I was married at the time. I had 2 kids at home at the time. I had already moved on from my first career in retail sales management. I was back in school at the time.
Okay.
Moving towards my history degree, which, I parlayed into a master's in library and information science, which is how I became a librarian. But that investigative committee did happen, but it didn't happen until after you put in the petition. So you meet with the guys first, you kind of get to know them, they get to know you. And then when you get to the point where, okay, I'm going to put this on paper, I want to join, then that's when they take that back to the lodge and say, okay, we need that investigative committee. So go meet him, go meet his wife, get to know them, see if they're going to fit with us and we fit with them.
After you have these strangers to meet you and your wife, it's always interesting that we want, during an investigative committee, to have the wife's input. I think one thing that we haven't done the best in years is to be able to articulate what it is to be a Freemason. Now, your wife, any experience with what Masonry was? And then I have a follow-up question after that.
So, yes, she did have a little bit of experience. She didn't realize it at the time. So I'll give the little anecdote there. We were helping her grandfather move from his condo into a senior apartment complex. And at the time, I'd known him 10, 15 years at this point in time. Great guy, always got on very well with him. And Jill's like, hey, go ahead and tell him what you just did. And I'm like, okay, well, I just got raised a Master Mason in my lodge, right? So he gets up at that point, shuffles over to the bookcase, pulls down a photo album, shuffles back over to the couch, sits down next to me, and starts showing me all the photos of when he was raised in his lodge back in Long Island, New York.
How did you feel about that?
I was blown away, frankly, and so was my wife, because like she kind of knew that like Grandpa was part of some different organizations and stuff because he was always active in multiple things. But she never kind of put the 2 and 2 together that he was a Mason until that point. And then it's like, oh yeah, it wasn't Grandma in there too. So he was himself. He was a Mason. He was a Scottish Rite Mason. He was a Shriner. His wife was an Order of the Eastern Star. So that kind of broke that floodgate of memory open for my wife. And she's like, oh my God, this all makes sense now.
Oh.
So she was in at that point in time. She realized this is part of my family too.
That's
so
awesome.
It's just crazy to see how that all linked up together.
Oh, 100%. My next question with this is, just before you are going to knock on that door, which you're already in the process, you passed the ballot box. What was your preconceived notions of what Freemasonry was?
I tried to open this with a very free and blank mind, because I knew from my research, again, that's just my personality, is to look into things a lot before I dive in.
You have a whole library of untapped knowledge right there.
Exactly,
and tapped knowledge.
Exactly. So I tried not to have that preconceived notion, because if I had given into the stereotypes, I would have just been joining a geriatric men's club. You know what I mean? That everybody can really associate that. Like they think about like all these Masons who are 80 plus and it's an old white guys club. And that was not the case.
That's a direct quote from Chris Potts.
Yep. That was definitely not the case. I mean, we have brothers in my lodge that I met that run the entire gambit of political viewpoints, that run the entire gambit of racial viewpoints, that run the gambit of religious viewpoints. I mean, we've got a brother in our lodge that's Muslim. We got a brother in our lodge that's Hindu. We got a brother that's, Jewish.
What brings all these men to the fraternity?
I wish I had a very solid answer for that. I just don't, because we all come from such vast different backgrounds, different life experiences, and different paths, but somehow it managed to lead us all to that same point. I wish there was one catalyst spark that says, this is what happens to make you a Mason, but that it doesn't exist, because we all come from vastly different things. One of my great mentors and dear, dear friends, he's passed on now, was our former lodge secretary before me, Tom. He was a farm equipment salesman, and he was a farm boy. He had a chestnut farm that he loved dearly. I'm a librarian. How in the world would our paths have crossed if it wasn't for our fraternity?
Right.
And he was the type of guy that, I would just call him up on a Friday night. I'm bored. You want to go see a movie? You want to go grab a beer? So like there was that mentorship involved, but it wasn't like, oh, he was a second father to me. He was a friend. There was no generational line. There was no division of I'm up here, you're down there. We were truly all on the level.
Isn't that beautiful though?
It was such a fantastic experience. And there were so many brothers that I share that with and continue to share that with today.
Yeah. Take us, for example. We've been Facebook friends for a while. I don't know how it all comes about, but it did. And I've definitely heard your name before it throughout my travels. I am newer to the council part of York Rite Masonry, hence why I couldn't get that name out at first. But again, it's an enjoyment. It's a different enjoyment from all the other things I'm involved in. When you were going through the degrees and you're entering this, not knowing anybody in this lodge, which lodge did you petition?
Lansing 33.
Lansing 33. What's your first thoughts driving home after your first steps into Freemasonry?
Let me lead off by saying I'm very proud to say we just celebrated on January 10th Lansing Lodge's 175th anniversary.
Congratulations.
So that's a huge milestone for our lodge. We actually predate the city of Lansing by 9 years. It was
Wow.
Lansing Township when our lodge was formed. Okay.
And how many people live in Lansing?
Somewhere between 400 to 500,000, depends on the area and the census and stuff like that. It fluxes a lot. We lost a lot when COVID hit, because a lot of guys that didn't have to be downtown in the capital and could work remotely, they left.
Yeah. I think that's all changing now in the government perspective, but.
And then also, you know, with Lansing metro area, we have a Big Ten university, Michigan State University right there.
Yep.
So we lose about 100,000 people over the summer, you know, because every class is always historically the biggest class we've admitted yet. But anyway, so your question to me was, what did I feel about?
Yeah, what was your initial thoughts after taking those steps and embracing that ritual ceremony? You're meeting all these people that you don't know, and we're not giving away anything of the degree work. I want to know, what's your initial thoughts? I mean, clearly, were you taken back by it? Were you impressed by what you saw, or maybe some kind of symbolism?
Definitely, I was impressed by the ritual and the symbolism, for sure and certain, because that's the hook that pulls you in to make you study of, why do we use this symbol? What's the meaning behind it? But on the personal level, and what kept me coming back more than anything, was the fellowship, camaraderie, and brotherly love. I mentioned before, I grew up in a small town. I mean, Midland is not a very big place. Back when I was living there, I want to say we were about 30,000 people. Okay. It's small. Now it's probably about 50 or so. I don't know the actual number.
Sure.
But my point is everybody knew everybody, and everybody knew everybody else's business. It was a small town. So now all of a sudden I move into this bigger city, roughly 500,000 people. I know nobody. I know my wife. I know my coworkers. And that's what it was like for a couple of years. I mean, I started living and working down in Lansing in 2002, and I didn't join the lodge until 2012. So there was 10 years where I just kind of felt myself adrift, you know, and of course you make friends here and there and do things like that, but it wasn't really home.
Right.
Now I join this lodge. Now I start to get to know all these people in the community and get this network going. Then next thing you know, I can't go to the grocery store without running into 2-3 people. And it brought that small town feeling to a large city. And that just meant the world to me, because that's when that city started to feel like home.
I appreciate how you say that. And especially as you get another year under your belt, and your network is your net worth. It's a famous quote that I love. You also are meeting people who might notice a pin on you, might notice the ring you're wearing, or see a decal or a shirt or a logo. And you don't know each other, but by just some certain modes of recognition, you know each other. What's that bond like? Because I don't believe
it is so hard to articulate that, because you just genuinely feel, I get excited and I have a love for whenever I stumble across another Mason.
Yeah.
It doesn't even need to be like, I don't know you, I'm not going to talk to you sort of thing. That's not it at all. Like, I can be passing a car and notice it on a license plate and then give a friendly little wave or something like that.
You can feel it all around you.
Absolutely. And the best, I mean, again, it's a trope for us, but you know, Masons are all just best friends that haven't met yet.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that, because I've been that traveler. I've been to these big gatherings and even international meetings. You know, my role in the Grand Council, I had to go attend the General Grand Council's meetings, which that's I want to say like 180, 190 jurisdictions from around the world all gather. And I made friends with guys from Latvia. I made friends with guys from Bulgaria. I've got great friends down in Brazil that I constantly get invites. Are you coming down to the Grand Council of Brazil? Come visit us. And again, it's those friends you just haven't met yet. They will automatically go out of their way for me, and I will automatically go out of my way for them.
Do you think it's because of the principles and lessons that the fraternity provides of how to conduct yourself? Men come from all walks of life in the fraternity. Some people have more of a rougher ashlar.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are a bit more refined. Some people are, a lot of people were lost and they're trying to find a sense of solid ground and clarity in a time where it feels dark because of, media narrative, things going on in the community. I definitely would say that men are isolated. Do you think that it's the teachings of our fraternity that truly make men better? Because we always hear that, but what does that really mean to make men better?
So I think one of the biggest benefits is being part of something bigger. Like, we can all use that sports analogy of you feel better when you're part of the team.
Yeah.
This is providing us with a team. Now, the tenets of our brotherhood, I'm going to throw away some secrets here. There's nothing in there that we don't already know. In the sense of, if you can be a good and moral man, not necessarily even study the Bible, but study your book of holy law, it lays all of it out there. All Masonry is doing is picking that same lesson up, brushing it off and saying, no, seriously, look at this. Pay attention to this.
Right.
This is how you conduct yourself as a man. This is what's important. We were already told it before, but this is just that nice, friendly, brotherly reminder of this is the way.
And your brother, who was the walnut farmer?
Mm-hmm. Chestnut.
Yep. I apologize. Chestnut farmer. He took you under his wing.
Mm-hmm.
He was a Mason for how long before you, right when you joined?
I don't remember exactly when he joined, but I can tell you he was secretary for our lodge for over 23 years.
Well, that's a lot.
I mean, that is a lifetime sentence, as we all know. But that being said, there were a lot of different brothers in that lodge that took me under their wing. So I don't want it to sound, especially to anybody who thinks about petitioning and joining a lodge, it's not like you're paired one in one. The old African proverb says it takes a village. And that's exactly what it is you've got brothers that would mentor me in how to public speak. But then I had a different brother that would show me how to sharpen knives, because that was his skill set. He owned a business doing that. And one of the things we were talking about on the drive down here was my lodge has kind of started these projects of like improving the lodge building.
Okay.
And they've turned it into like these social gatherings. And sometimes they'll go over rituals. Sometimes they'll paint a wall. Sometimes they'll fix, the duct system or something like that. But the important part there is at that point, that's when that mentorship is happening, because, you've got a brother who may be a college student, never picked up a paintbrush before, but now that elder brother who may only be 30 years old, but he's not, fresh, but he's passing down that skill set. He's mentoring him in something different that he can apply to in his life.
I love that analogy of, the fraternity helps work on ourselves and teaches us how to work on ourselves. And that's the microcosm into the macrocosm of the lodge community and what the fraternity provides. And you're now taking that as a moment to even build those enriching, deeper bonds of brotherhood by fixing the edifice where you meet. Because in a way, this is Masonry right here.
Mm-hmm.
We have beautiful buildings, and we've lost many beautiful buildings throughout time. But this is why we love to call it the symbolic lodge of conversation, because this is Masonry.
Mm-hmm.
We're opening, having a discussion. They're learning who you are and what brought you here. There's a good chance you and I probably would have never met out in the world. Could it be? But again, you're a librarian. I work for a software development company. It brings people from all walks of life. I remember when I was a custodial worker when I first came in. So you're a part of this. You're active in your lodge. How soon until you're getting active in your Blue Lodge and kind of understanding like maybe leadership?
So I had about 30 seconds after I was raised a Master Mason before they made me get active in the leadership of my lodge.
They just solicited that member, that bit of responsibility.
So I had a fantastic brother and mentor, Dick Porter. Okay. He was a past master like 2 times over, but he was sitting in the junior warden chair again at that point in time. So he was one of those guys that just had such a fascinating and interesting life story. Please forgive me if I get any of the details wrong, but if I remember what he had passed on to me, he was in the U.S. Army. He flew a Chinook. He was also apparently the last hangman for the U.S. Army at Fort Leavenworth back in the day, which I don't have any more details underneath that. But, you know, like his wife came from Japan. He was stationed out in Okinawa. Just a fascinating, fascinating thing. But anyway, Dick, at this point, this little old man, because he was well over 80 at the time, is like, you, come here, sit down. And he puts me right in that junior steward chair. And from that point in time, he was fostering me and being like, you can do this. I will show you the ropes. I will make sure you talk to the right people because you can do all of this.
Did you feel, though, that he was doing that because he's like, okay, we have a spot that needs to be filled. I'm already going to start working on this. Or did you feel that there was more of a benevolent reason for that?
Oh, 1,000%. He was on the board of, I want to help train you, and not like, we need a warm body to sit here. Because if they wanted a warm body to sit there, I would have been senior warden the next year.
Oh, okay. So he wanted you to enjoy that journey, take it. And for those of you that don't know, a junior steward is kind of the first seat into the officer's line. And that's where you're really getting your foundational of being a lodge officer.
Right. So just to be clear here too, I was never appointed to that spot, but he made me sit there so he could explain everything. Like, this is what the senior warden is doing. This is what the secretary is doing. So he starts teaching me all of these principles. Like, he'd lean over in the middle of the degree. Like, did you pay attention to that passage? What did you learn from that passage? What does that mean to you? How do you apply that?
So he's challenging you.
Exactly. And then, of course, that led into the, oh, why don't you stop by the house on the weekend? We'll go over your obligations so you can pass your exams and stuff like that.
I like this turning of the tables as it was, because when you're growing up, you're asking all the questions. Now you're in, and now you're at the other side of the table where somebody who's already been seated and has experience with the fraternity is asking you questions to test you, to be able to see that, hey, we're articulating this to this newer member, and he needs to get the principles of what this institution stands for.
Right.
That's really remarkable. And I bet you somebody did that to him when he was at your time in life.
Probably young. Yeah. So that's one thing that I will always stress to everybody is a mentor does not need to be an elder. A mentor can be younger than you. It can be an equivalent or older. It doesn't matter. The fact is we are all here to work on ourselves as men. And from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high, we all have something to offer for each other. And that was one thing that they hammered into me from the get-go was everybody has something to offer. You just got to tease it out sometimes.
When we talk about some of the phrases we hear in the fraternity, faith, hope, and charity.
Sure.
Ironically, you come from a smaller town called Hope. Let's talk about charity.
Yep.
And I'm not saying let's talk about writing a check and giving it to somebody in need or an institution in need and all patting ourselves on the back and say, boy, we really did a great thing. I'm talking about true charity, that brotherly love, relief, truth. I would love to hear, have you seen these tenets that are always talked about being performed in Masonry?
Absolutely. So I had mentioned about how he'd have me over on the weekends.
Yeah.
I mean, that's brotherly love right there. He is giving up his free time from away from his business to teach this new guy his obligations, to be able to perform the signs, grips, and words and all the secret stuff. He took that out of his own time away from his family, and that was charity to me. I know we tend to think of charity as signing the check, throwing money out there in the world.
Right.
But I can't stress enough how much my lodge has done for me in charity, and some of the other portions of the appendant bodies that I belong to have done in charity. And when I say that, I'm not talking about monetary.
Sure.
I'm talking about we were discussing beforehand about the struggles I have in my life, about my wife. She struggles with bipolar disorder, and it's severe enough to the point where she can't work. So she is disabled. So that puts me in the caretaker role all the time. And sometimes that can be extremely difficult and taxing on mental health for me, not to mention her health, because you have a loved one who's suffering.
Silent battle that you can't see or you can't hear what's going on in her mind. An invisible battle, which you can't see. What's it like? I have some experience with bipolar 2. What was that like as you're getting more active in the fraternity? You have 2 kids and trying to understand what your wife's going through.
So that's really where I feel the charity kicks in, and I'll choke up a little bit about it because those brothers really step up to the plate. And when I say that, it's something as simple as checking in on me, giving me that friendly phone call or text. Hey, how you doing? I know she's struggling right now, and that's hard on the whole family, but how are you doing? Do you need me to bring you dinner? Do you want me to take the kids off your hands for a couple of hours so you can get a breather?
Yeah.
That's all happened.
I understand. Believe me. Believe me, I get it.
That's just such a phenomenal thing to have that network of people. And then as you grow up in the fraternity, I guess is the best way to say it, your network becomes larger and larger and larger. So not only do I have guys that'll check in on me from my local lodge around Lansing, but, if they see, I go a little radio silent, I might get a phone call from a good friend down in Georgia, and it just means the world.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting the people we interact with and how those bonds are forged so quickly, because we are being the best examples of the fraternity, and those men can relate because you walk through the same steps that all these other men walked through.
So let me interject something here too, because this is just phenomenal too. My wife, she supports me 100% in all my Masonic endeavors. We can talk more about the Grand Line stuff because that is fantastic stuff there. But for example, at our 175th celebration, earlier this month, she started having a panic attack.
Okay.
I'm the master of ceremonies. I'm stuck running around, taking care of all the Grand Lodge officers, talking with the mayor's assistant and everything like that. And she's hurting. What do I do in that situation? Well, some of the other wives and girlfriends know the situation too. Who do you think stepped up, got her to go upstairs to the office and calm down? We work together as a cohesive unit in a family, the wives and girlfriends and sisters included. And I can't stress that enough, of such a huge benefit to our fraternity. It's not just the men.
No, it's not. There's times often where the wives and girlfriends will call me and pick my brains. Hey, Ted's about to become the head of the lodge. I don't know what to do. I need some advice. He's getting more involved. Or John's becoming a district officer. I need to know what I have to be expecting. And just by being able to visualize it and be able to, one, talk to the wives, to be able to talk to the brothers and just have an easy conversation saying it's going to be okay. It's not going to be overtaxing. But in the fraternity, we often hear that, masonry can't conflict with your duty to God, your country, your neighbor, yourself. The fraternity will always be here. And there's times when people have to take a break, a hiatus, and they come back. There's also those times when men who take a break and don't come back because they feel like they let the lodge down. When really, we're just waiting for them to come back and reaching out. One thing, you've been a part of so many different branches, but one that really hits home is your Masonic career in the Grand Council line. How do you balance being a young man like you are, having your wife, having 2 kids, knowing that now there's an additional sense of responsibility and I have to be more active and I have to try to balance my personal life, my work life, and my Masonic life at that point? Tell us how that is going into leadership.
Right. So that was a challenge. I'm not going to lie. It is a big step up in responsibility and knowing when you got to go and when you got to stay and everything there. Thankfully, I had a great mentor in the Grand Council, a past most illustrious Grand Master, Warren Karras. He was from my home council too. And he was able, when I started expressing interest in maybe potentially pursuing this and getting into the Grand Line, he was able to sit down with me and my wife and kind of lay out, like, really, what's the requirements. So, like I said, my wife is such a sweetheart. She really has all of her confidence in me and she supports me unconditionally. That being said, one of the things that's such a benefit for me is the fact that she is disabled because she doesn't work. So she looks forward to those trips. Even if I have to be like, hey, guess what? I got to drive over to Niles, Michigan, which is like 2.5 hours away, or I got to drive up to Mackinac tonight to handle something. She's like, all right, I'll get my coat. Let's go. Because that's how she gets out of the house.
Yeah.
And then she gets to meet all these other people. She gets to hang out with all these other people. She's made great friends all over the country. She keeps in contact with a lot of the ladies she's met through this, even, from like the Grand Council of Ontario, the Grand Council of Georgia, Michigan, Ohio. You know what I mean? So she's on board for that. Now, I won't lie. When my kids were younger, I have 2 boys. Right now, they're 18 and 20, so they're adults. But you got to remember that's a 7-year line in council, so they would have been 11 and 13 when I started. So when they were little, they got a little bit resentful of dad's gone, dad's missing this, dad's missing that.
How do you handle that?
At first, I just did my best to explain, well, I've got some responsibilities. I agreed to take them on. So I'm sorry I'm missing this. But let me put the asterisks in there of saying, if it was ever something big, like a big soccer game or something no, I didn't miss that. I would make those things of sorry, lodge, sorry, council, chapter, commandery, whatever. I have to be somewhere else for my family tonight. But, those random nights of just hanging around to play video games, that's what they kind of got resentful about was dad's always gone. So that kind of grinded on them. And I do my best to explain, well, I've accepted these positions and these responsibilities. So it's no different than if I had to close at work, because that was part of my life too. I have a night shift every now and again where I have to be to work until 9 p.m.
Right.
So it just is what it is. And they were, again, when they were little, they were a little bit resentful. But I can tell you the pinpoint in time when everything changed for them. And it was when I was one of the baby Grand Council officers. I was the Grand Marshal at the time. And I came down to the Grand Council of Ohio. And that was great because I got to meet my counterpart. He was one of the first guys from Ohio to introduce themselves to me was my counterpart, who was Wes Weber.
Oh, Wes, absolutely.
So that conference, when I was down here, I approached my kids and I'm like, they're hosting it at the Kalahari Resorts, which is this huge water park thing.
Right.
So they were all in after that point in time. They were like, Dad gets to go hang out at these cool places and take all these neat vacations. So, on one hand, I'm schlepping them all over the country. on the flip side, that was an experience I never got as a child. My parents, we were northern Michigan and we just kind of stayed up there.
Right.
My dad was deathly afraid of Detroit and Chicago and stuff like that. So like even when we would go over to Chicago to visit family, we'd stay on the outskirts. We'd never go into the city itself. So the one thing I should preface that with is my dad, I was the youngest of four. So there's a big age gap between me and my siblings even too. So my dad was 46 when I was born. So by the time I'm 10 years old, he's already retired,
right.
So like, he grew up through all those hard times from the 1930s, saw the riots in the 1960s, the race riots in Detroit. So like we would not even go to Detroit. So like my wife is from Farmington Hills. So like when the boys were having their first birthday parties, we'd go down to my father-in-law's house up in Farmington Hills, which that's way far out suburb, but he was petrified to even drive there. So it's just such a thing to see how that family can switch. And then all of a sudden those boys were just, I see the benefit to this. And they have been ever since that point, 100% for it.
Now, you are part of the lodge. You become master. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of non-Masons and people interested in what the fraternity is. I would like to hear you articulate, what is this council we've been talking about this whole episode? What is that like? Can you be able to articulate on the tree of Masonry, as I like to call? Mm-hmm. You're a master Mason. Where does this come from? This brand, and what is it?
So you got to think about this in levels of accessibility. Okay. You have to be a master Mason to join so many of these other organizations. Like everybody's heard of Shriners Shriners Hospitals for Children. Got the word salad going here.
I understand.
You have to be a Mason to become a Shriner. You have to be a Mason in your Blue Lodge to become a member of the York Rite. You have to be a Mason in your Blue Lodge to become a member of the Scottish Rite. Okay. So if you think about, our allegorical symbol of the square and compasses, right? Those first 3 degrees are the hub of the compass. And those 2 legs are the York Rite and the Scottish Rite, I would say. Okay. So just allegorically.
I love it.
Okay. Because you take them all together, it's the same object, but yet you have one path over here and one path over here.
Yep.
Okay. So anybody who's heard of, my grandpa was a 32nd degree Mason, well, that means he was a Scottish Rite Mason. Obviously we've got the Knights Templar over on the York Rite side. Now the York Rite is a way of exploring some more of the moral lessons contained within Masonry. And I would advocate that it is made up of 3 equal bodies: the chapter, the council, and the commandery. And you have to think about it allegorically like a stool. Okay.
Stool.
You can sit on a 2-legged stool. It's not very comfortable. But when you get that 3rd leg in there, that's when you reach equilibrium. That's when you reach balance.
Okay.
So those 3 bodies, there is no one that's necessarily over the other. Some guys will argue that this one is the top or that one's the top, or no, let's set aside the egos and actually look at the lessons involved. They're all equal. That's why, symbolically, we've got the 3 Grand Masters. Well, we've got the 3 legs of York Rite. We've got 3 over here. I mean, you can't argue with Pythagoras and all of his theorems on triangles. Triangles are one of the strongest shapes in geometry for a reason. A triangle will outlast a square. Think about that. You can crush a square-sided box, but try crushing that triangle.
I've never thought of it like that. I appreciate the allegory.
So yeah, so each of those bodies within the York Rite teach a different story and explores a different avenue of the lessons in Masonry. So to reinforce the point, you're never more of a Mason than when you are that 3rd degree Master Mason. So a lot of people think and get it mixed up that, nope, the 32nd degree Mason is above. No. You got your master's degree, literal, like think about it like a master's degree from college at that 3rd degree. And when you go down the Scottish Rite or the York Rite, you're getting a minor. You're refining your studies. It's not super, it's sub. So you're just putting more polish on that same stone. So when you get the York Rite stories, you learn about the chapters teaching about like rediscovery of the secrets. Council is how we got there, and then commandery is how we defend it.
Now they call it York Rite Masonry.
Mm-hmm.
But for some people that may be aware, you also have a little bit of Judaism in it as well.
Just like the Blue Lodge.
Correct.
Okay. So it's called York Rite Masonry because supposedly in mythology of creating the rite, it was all founded in the city of York. Okay. So up in northern England. So that's where it gets its name, is York Rite. But the lessons contained in the chapter and the council focus on the Old Testament teachings, just like the stuff in the Blue Lodge.
Okay.
Where the commandery focuses on the New Testament. And that's why it's got that Christian component to it.
Now, you become active in council.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a successive? So you got to join chapter first, and then you can join council, and then you can join commandery? How's the dynamics work of being a part of that? Do you got to belong to all three?
So no, you don't have to belong to all three.
Okay.
There are plenty of guys who only go into chapter. That's your step in. So like you need to be part of the symbolic Blue Lodge to get into York Rite, Shrine, Scottish Rite, or whatever. To do anything in the York Rite, you have to belong to chapter. So from there, you don't have to join council. You can go straight into the commandery.
Okay.
And I think that could have potentially hurt us in the past. But overall, I think that really just shows the guys who are committed to the lessons are the ones who really want to join the council too. Because you've got guys who will join the council and not go to commandery, or you got the guys who will join the commandery and not go to council. But those who really want to know the whole story will join all three.
Okay.
Now, that being said, then there's the bodies that are above, like York Rite College. You can't get into York Rite College unless you're a member of Chapter Council Commandery. You can't get into KYCH unless you're a past leader of Lodge, Chapter, Council, Commandery.
So you got to be a past head of Blue Lodge, Chapter, Council, and Commandery, and
Correct.
then you don't just assume you're going to be getting this.
Nope, it's an invite past that.
Yes. You're in the leadership.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of dynamics.
Yes.
You got to go travel, as you said, all across the country for this. You're going through a 7-year line, dealing with a lot of different personalities, maybe even some egos, right?
Yeah.
Typically, as a head grand, illustrious grand master or grand body of masonry, they all have a theme and they all have a logo or a lapel pin. I see you're wearing one. You gave me one. I appreciate it. And Mike's actually going to be able to put that logo on the screen. But why don't you just kind of walk us through why you went with that logo when you were the head during your time?
Okay. Well, obviously, you always have symbols in any of the appendant bodies that you associate with that body. I wanted to choose something that was a little bit lesser known, but still was super important, especially to me. So in like Blue Lodge, everybody uses the square and compass. But how many other symbols do we have? Tons, right? So in the council, one of the degrees has a story about when we're depositing stuff in the secret vault.
Yep.
Okay. And when we make that deposit, King Solomon leaves the golden triangle on top of the Ark of the Covenant for future generations to find. So that's the link from the past to the future right there. Okay. Then they decide to leave the three master squares: Solomon's Square, Hiram's Square, and Hiram Abiff's Square. Now, when I'm talking about squares, I'm talking about the little right angle squares that we see at the bottom of the square and compass. And they arrange them around the golden triangle. Okay. So personally, to me, that point in the story, when I witnessed that degree for the first time, I'm going to geek out here. that was my Voltron moment. That was when all the lions came together to form the big mega robot.
Okay.
That's when the entire York Rite made sense to me. And I'm like, I got it. I understand. And that's when I knew I could really get behind this, not just their methodology, but their teachings and everything. So that's why that symbol meant so much to me. So I adopted that for my year. And then I made, instead of having the pin all gold, I made the triangle in the center have a purple overlay for the council, because the purple is the color for the council. And then I put a Celtic knot, a triquetra, on top of that. And I'll make sure to get you the logo so you can post that up so people can see it more clearly. So that knot is a little bit of a nod to my heritage, so that's my personal touch on there. But it's also a fascinating symbol in and of itself, because there's a circle at the center, right? Which we can all symbolize with the circle from the first degree. That circle is trisected. So now it is made up of 3 arcs by that knot, and each angle of that knot has 2 arcs to it. So if you count the 3 angles with 2 arcs, that's 6. And then a circle that is divided into 3. So now you have 9 arcs, 9 arches, which is another hidden secret mystery of the council, is to have 9 arches.
That's fascinating. I really appreciate your attention to detail with this. And with council in York Rite, it's considered Christian Masonry in a way, right?
Not as much as the commandery.
Correct. Knights Templarism would definitely.
That one has the hard membership requirement of you should believe in a Trinitarian God.
But you talked about numerology just before we got on this podcast. And you also said that there could be some numerology influence in Masonry.
Absolutely. I think that there is a lot of hidden esoteric knowledge all throughout our degrees, whether you're looking at York Rite or Scottish Rite. It's all laid out for us there, but sometimes we don't have the right lens to look at it. So we can be very familiar, maybe even give the lecture for, say, the fellowcraft degree from memory. But then, as you're becoming more and more of a practiced Mason, you hear that lecture again and something new strikes with you. And you're like, wait a minute, does this really mean what's going on here? And that's what keeps you coming back and circling through these degrees again and again and again. So I do think there is some obviously religious text there, because again, we're looking at the Old Testament, but that is also known as the Tanakh for the Jewish faith. So then you got to look at what other mystery schools are involved. Do we have stuff in there from the Kabbalah? Do we have stuff in there from numerology? Are we looking at Christian mysticism? What else is hidden in plain sight? And there's so many layers, so many layers.
And that's where more questions come from.
Exactly. And that's what drives a guy like me to do even more and more research.
I appreciate your dedication. I appreciate you coming all the way to tell your story here at All Square. We are definitely coming up to the end of our episode. Throughout your journey, there is somebody out here looking into Freemasonry. There are people who are questioning what Freemasonry is. If you could sum it up to some words of wisdom, what would you tell the people watching about Masonry? What piece of advice?
The biggest piece of advice I can give you is this: my biggest regret in Masonry.
Okay.
I didn't do it sooner. I should have done it sooner. 100%. That this has been so beneficial to me and my family through the love and support of my lodge brothers, my chapter companions, my council companions, my fellow Knights Templar, everybody. So much love and support and networking and everything. It's like being served the golden apple on the platter. It's right there. Why don't you take it? So that would be my biggest regret, is because I didn't step up sooner and it took me so long to find this path.
But you're here now and you're making a difference. That's my brother, Chris Potts. I'm R.L. Franks, and you are All Square. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
subscribe.
Thank you, All Square community. We appreciate your support to our ever-growing channel. You are helping us convey the message of brotherly love, relief, and truth to our fraternity. All Square's mission is simple. We're here to tell the stories of everyday men from all walks of life, to articulate what it means to be a Freemason, to provide deep, meaningful content for those who are searching for that brotherhood and that support, as well as our advocacy for men's mental health. Just by liking, sharing, and subscribing, you're sharing this to men from all across the country and around the world, and we're so blessed to have you a part of our movement. Don't forget to continue to liking, sharing, and subscribing.